Now President Trump saying this: if China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, April the 8th, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. He goes on to say that additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated.
And it sort of struck me about President Trump's Truth Social posting, which was just less than an hour ago, was if you know much about the Chinese structure and about Xi Jinping, the idea of setting him a deadline to back down in 24 hours, he's not going to do that. He's not going to end up looking weaker to Donald Trump.
In one sharp move, the United States has raised the stakes of global trade to explosive levels. Eyes turn to the White House, where a freshly signed executive order triggers a wave of new tariffs, and the tremors are being felt from Beijing to Berlin. According to recent reports in February 2025, tariffs on Chinese goods skyrocketed to an average of 42.1%, cementing the highest level in modern U.S. history. And those are just the opening shots. Will this provoke a global chain reaction that reshapes the economic order? Stick around because the shock is real. The countdown has already begun. Decades of painstakingly negotiated trade deals wiped away in a single stroke. At the center of this firestorm, Trump's freshly imposed base tariff of 10% on all imports, an all-encompassing levy that spares no nation. Everything has to be made in the United States, echoes a defiant voice, an echo that shudders through factory floors from Tokyo to Berlin. The logic behind this sweeping policy, some sources argue, is simple. Bring manufacturing home, revitalize local industry, and stifle foreign competition at every turn.
Governor Kim Reynolds responded to the tariff announcements, saying in part, quote, President Trump is using tariffs as leverage to force our trading partners to the table and put America's farmers first.
But the sledgehammer falls heaviest on China. Beijing's advanced exports, electric vehicles, semiconductors, and consumer electronics face stacked tariffs that, when combined, can reach an astronomical 54%. Chinese cars will forever be banned from the U.S., roars one official statement. This message, amplified by the White House, has triggered alarm not merely abroad, but also among American consumers and businesses that rely on cheaper imports. Some experts warn that permanently sever U.S.-China trade relations could be a real possibility if tensions worsen. In February 2025, economists at PIIE calculated the jump in duties on Chinese products, revealing a steep climb from pre-2018 levels to the current staggering barrier. Those fresh increments aren't just numbers on a chart, they are real costs set to ripple through supply chains worldwide. Consider phones, car parts, and everyday electronics, once affordable for American families, now weighed down by tariffs that could raise prices overnight. What happens when everyday life gets more expensive? Will this wave of levies unleash homegrown manufacturing or backfire in the form of inflation that hits ordinary citizens hardest?
I think that the tariffs will hurt us in the long run because the consumer will have to pay more. It's going to be negative all the way around.
While Washington lobs tariff after tariff, Beijing seems to have a layered strategy in reserve. For nearly 7 years, China has steadily diversified its global trade partnerships with Russia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and beyond, preparing for a day when U.S. tariffs might become unbearable. Data shows that U.S.-China bilateral trade volume has declined by 3 to 5% over the last 6 years, revealing that China already began pivoting eastward. The looming question remains, can Beijing fully negate the American market's pull by strengthening these alternative ties? China's leaders have also signaled that direct retaliation may not be their first move. Their actions are often described as calculated and deliberate, contrasting sharply with the more erratic moves of U.S. policy. Indeed, China's central bank has multiple levers to stimulate domestic growth, from reserve requirement cuts to targeted subsidies for critical industries. Some analysts insist that these liquidity injections, proven successful before, will guide the country through a storm of tariffs. Others, however, predict a darker turn. Beijing could ban key imports from the US or restrict the export of crucial minerals like rare earths, inflicting real pain on America's tech and defense sectors. According to PIIE, such a showdown might solidify an irreversible economic divide. But is this what the world's two largest economies really want? A permanent rift? Or is China aiming to overshadow the US by developing new alliances that sidestep American influence altogether? The jury is still out while the clock keeps ticking. This isn't just about the United States and China. Tariffs now slap Japan at 24%, South Korea at 26%, India at 27%, Vietnam at 46%. The rise in these import taxes has left longtime allies reeling. Multinational manufacturers must choose: absorb the tariffs, pass costs on to consumers, or pull production out of Asia and move it back onto American soil. And what if they can't? US tariffs once hovered around 2.5%. Now, they have surged to an effective rate of 22% in under a year, a move some call an economic earthquake. A sudden stampede of companies trying to relocate to the US might sound like a triumph for the White House, but many question the feasibility of uprooting global supply chains overnight. If consumer demand falters, the result could be a dramatic collapse in imports. Already, consumer advocates caution that the cost of new cars, smartphones, and even basic household goods could skyrocket. 11% of US GDP derives from imports, and the administration hopes to rake in $700 billion through these tariffs. Yet critics argue that this is nothing more than a hidden tax on American buyers. So, which scenario will prevail? An American boom or a meltdown of consumer spending and confidence? For Japanese automakers, Korean electronics giants, and Indian garment exporters, the stakes are terrifyingly high. One step in the wrong direction could result in massive layoffs or, worse, permanent exclusion from the US consumer market. Can the global economic fabric hold together, or are we witnessing the threads begin to tear? While Washington flexes its tariff muscle, the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus new entrants like Indonesia and Nigeria, is seizing the moment. Emerging economies, weary of American unpredictability, are knitting together alternate trade routes. In January 2025, BRICS members welcomed Indonesia as a full participant and Nigeria as a partner, a bold step that extends their influence across two continents. Recent discussions of eventual BRICS pay platforms signal an ambition to bypass the dollar altogether.
President Putin's attempt to reduce his country's dependence on the dollar for cross-border payments comes after the imposition of wide-ranging sanctions by Western countries in response to Russia's 2022 special military operation in Ukraine.
Many countries around the world, including close US allies like Japan, have come to recognize that they may have been misled, a sentiment that underscores the growing perception of Washington's missteps. According to some assessments, the combined GDP share of BRICS nations could reach nearly 30%, enough heft to challenge the Western-led financial order. Fearing the chaos of endless tariffs, key nations from Southeast Asia to the Middle East have started exploring deeper cooperation with BRICS members. The repercussions loom large for the almighty US dollar. Over the last day, it has dropped 2%, the steepest single-day hit in years. Some economists warn that if foreign investors bleed out of US markets, the greenback could spiral downward even further. In that scenario, the ability of the US to import cheaply and finance its debt through overseas buyers might falter. Is this the start of a new monetary era, where the dollar's reign as the default safe haven currency erodes under the combined weight of tariffs and alternative alliances? BRICS, for its part, seems to be counting on exactly that. Friendshoring was once the buzzword, the promise that US allies would share in a collective manufacturing renaissance. However, the reality has become clear. The initiative was less about collaboration and more about reshoring factories to the United States. Even Japan, a longtime partner, faces punitive tariffs on its advanced exports, leading to a sense of betrayal across the Pacific. From Asia to Europe, trust in American leadership has eroded. traditional allies wonder if the next policy pivot will place them in the crosshairs again. Meanwhile, everyday Americans may soon feel the real brunt of these policies. Although White House officials insist that foreign goods become more expensive, but domestic goods do not true in reality, many economists question that assumption. Tariffs act as blunt instruments, essentially placing a tax on imported products, and higher costs could quickly pass through to store shelves nationwide. If wages fail to keep pace, the result could be a damaging spiral of lower consumption, weaker business profits, and job losses. At its worst, some warn, it may spark a recession that hits the manufacturing sector Trump set out to protect. Is the White House underestimating this domino effect? Or is it a calculated gamble, aiming to force global companies to invest in America, no matter the short-term pain? As tension mounts, the outcome remains murky. Certain policymakers believe Washington's boldness will ultimately cement the nation's industrial revival. Others fear it will alienate allies, provoke China and the BRICS alliance, and prompt an unprecedented shift away from the dollar. If that shift accelerates, the consequences could be profound. All eyes now turn to Beijing. Will the Chinese government enact sweeping counter-sanctions, cutting off critical minerals, and unleashing a retaliatory tariff tsunami? Or will it choose the quieter path, injecting liquidity and propping up domestic industries while the U.S. scrambles to justify sky-high consumer prices? Tension crackles with each passing hour. Some watchers say China's stimulus bazooka is ready. Others claim Beijing's leaders are biding their time, confident that Washington is isolating itself. Simultaneously, the US dollar teeters on a razor's edge. If foreign investors decide en masse that American bonds are too risky, if that final thread of trust frays, the currency could stumble into a freefall. Panic on Wall Street would be the least of it. A deep plunge might cascade through pension funds, mortgage rates, and savings accounts far and wide. The stakes of this game couldn't be higher. The next move by either side may forever tilt the balance of power in global trade. BRICS countries celebrate the U.S. isolating itself with massive tariffs. That's the rumor swirling in hushed policy circles. And it might be more than a rumor. In one afternoon, Trump has rattled the foundations of a global system decades in the making. Now, nations from Germany to Indonesia are hedging their bets, forging alliances, and watching a once unshakable superpower impose costly barriers. Ultimately, the question lingers. Is this scorched earth strategy a short-term gambit leading to a manufacturing renaissance, or a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound that could plunge the U.S. into crisis and push the rest of the world toward new economic centers of gravity? The stage is set for a new order, or chaos. The story is far from over.